Okay. There we go. Hi everyone. Welcome to today's Quick Connect Live. It's part of our Strengths Finder Singapore Network series. And right now we are going through a series of sessions whereby we call profiling tool shootout, right? We're just going to compare different kinds of profiling tools and see how it turns out. So we've compared CliftonStrengths and MBTI. We've compared CliftonStrengths with DISC. And today we're going to compare CliftonStrengths with Emergenetics. And fortunately, we have someone here with us who is certified Emergenetics. I mean, we call yourself a coach or facilitator.
Whatever that you're comfortable with. I do
Okay.
both actually. Yeah.
So we have someone who is certified in Emergenetics, which is our dear Jeffer. And we're just going to talk very quickly about it today and just do a comparison of pros and cons.
Yeah, okay. So thanks, Alex. So maybe just for the benefit of people who are not here and will later view the video, and also benefit of Ethan, since he haven't seen through the slides, right? I thought we just covered a bit lah. Sitcha is coming in. Then let me share screen.
Yay!
Okay, so just a quick introduction of Emergenetics.
Hi, Cher.
Let's do it, Cher.
It's Cher, right? Not Cher.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, Cher. Yes.
Sure.
Good morning.
Hi, good morning,
Good morning, Cher.
Yeah,
Right
we were
on
just right on time. We were just about to introduce a bit about Emergenetics. Let me know if you can see my screen, Alex.
Yeah, I see your screen.
Yep.
All right. Okay, great. So today's sort of introduction is another psychometric profile, which is called Emergenetics. I'll skip it a bit quicker lah, so we can get the gist of it, and then we can jump straight into the discussion. Right. So this is a typical Emergenetics profile that you would see. And I'm gonna slowly flesh out a bit about what are the different components to it, right? So on the top, you will see a little pie, which talks a lot more about the thinking styles. And then you saw the different colors mean the different domains of the thinking style that we are talking about. And then at the bottom, you will see something called the expressiveness, assertiveness, and flexibility. These are called behavioral attributes. So the difference between thinking styles and behavior attributes is thinking styles you can't really observe. You can have a sense of it based on what people do, but it's usually happening internally inside somebody's head. Whereas for behavior attributes, it is something that you can observe what somebody is doing. Okay, I'll share a bit more in the next couple of slides, but this is just to give you a sense. Okay, so it started from these two person, right? Gail Browning and Wendell Williams, right? So Gail is more of an educator who wants to create impact on students and educator. So her background is in education. Whereas Wendell Williams is more of a social psychologist who wants to develop a psychometric tool, right? So together they came together and developed this tool. And just to note that this, unlike some of the other tools out there where sometimes behaviors and thinking preferences are mixed into the same domain, Emergenetics is very clear around what is behavior attributes versus what is thinking styles. So that's the separation. Okay, so you can just briefly see the different components. Okay, I'll just move it so that you can see it quicker. So I mean, we talk a bit about what does Emergenetics stand for, right? Because emerge and genetics, basically it means emerge comes from your nurture, genetics comes from nature. That's why when you combine together, it forms the patterns of thinking and behaving that emerge from your own genetic blueprint, which is the genetics, and life experience, which is the emerge. Okay. So I think we'll explore a bit about what is the behavior attributes first. Actually, the three out of the three of them, the first one is expressiveness. It is defined as the outward display of emotions towards others and the world at large. So typically in Emergenetics, we use terms like, we don't use terms like low and high, we use terms like first third, second third, and third third. Right, so if you imagine somebody who's at third tends to be very gregarious, right? I think we have like Ethan here, right? From very far, you'll say, hi, sure, where are you coming from, right? And he's not afraid of expressing his emotions out publicly as well, and it can be very loud because there's a lot of energy, very animated. Whereas a first third tend to be more calm and measured, more introspective and quiet. Somebody like me, right? Even my voice is more measured and more collected in most feedback I get as well. Okay. Second, third, we call it people who can flex. So under certain circumstances, you may shift towards first, third, or second, or third, right? So there's more reserve and in between introspective and talkative. Okay, and then we have assertiveness, right? And this is the definition of it is the style and pace with which you advance thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, right? So if you look at it, right, first third is peacekeeping, easygoing, tend to go towards more consensus approach in your decision making, whereas in a third is more forceful, more driving. The pace is more fast. So in terms of peacekeeper, you imagine somebody like going for arranging for lunch, right? A first third would have responded by asking everyone around whether they're okay with it before deciding, okay, let's go with it because everybody okay with it. A third couldn't care less, right? As long as I want it, I'll just do it, right? So that's how you can tell the distinction. Second third is in between as well. Okay, so that just give you a sense of that. Now, flexibility is the willingness to accommodate the thoughts and actions of others, right? Not your own actions. Is when others make the change. How willing are you to accommodate the thoughts and actions of others, right? So you have first third. If you're in first third, you tend to be more focused and firm. Okay, so it's a bit like that. So when you set out the day to do something and you have blocked a time in your calendar that you do, this is the time where you need to finish this activity or task, and somebody comes to ask you for information, do you prefer to ask the person to wait or find another time to ask this because I want to finish my task first, right? If you are that type of preference, you tend to focus more on first third, which is very focused. I want to finish my task first. You want to meet me, you find another time slot, right? It's the same thing when I want to ask Alex out for dinner, right? He always tell me that the slot is booked. Please find another time which I'm available, right? So yeah,
Busy man.
yeah. Whereas as a third, you welcome change all the time. I can interrupt you most of the time, and you are able to change your decision and change your approach, attend to me, and go back to the things that you do, right? Many times when we were starting out this quick connect, right? Every time when we suggest to Ethan something, to him is okay, sure, why not? And he can accommodate it quite easily and weave it into the quick connect session, right? So just to give you a sense of the different type of personalities in the room as well, and the preference. Okay, so these are things that you can observe. That's why they are called behavioral attributes. Now, the next thing before I move into thinking styles, right, is to first look at this purple circle, right? And if you look at it, the top two pies, if you look at it, is called abstract. So typically, each individual or each person would either tend to be a bimodal or trimodal. That means we are dominant in different domains, right? Which I'll talk about the domains later lah. But we also have people who are unimodal, which are dominant in only one domain. So if the top two is looking at abstract, I think the next slide will cover more. Okay, yes. So if you look at it, right, if one of the domains is you are analytical and structural, you tend to be more convergent in your thinking, right? The questions tend to be more close-ended, task-oriented, want to move forward. Okay, whereas if you are conceptual and social as your dominant preference, you tend to be more divergent in your thinking. I mean, you have seen this kind of dilemmas before, right? Sometimes you try to in a meeting, you try to ask somebody to, okay, what's the next step? And then somebody suddenly presented new ideas and expand that topic again. And then you feel like, why is that person not ever going to close his loop, right? I feel that because I tend to be I tend to be the convergent thinker side of the house, because based on my own preference, right? And then if you have dominant preference in analytical and conceptual, you tend to think in terms of abstract, Whereas if you have structural and social, you tend to think in more concrete. So imagine it's just looking at a forest at bird's eye view versus looking at an individual trunk, right? At the bird's eye view, that's more the abstract view. And usually people tend to see, oh, what's the overall plan, the overview. You can tell from their language and the requests. Whereas for structure and social, they tend to want to see the process steps and the details. Okay. Okay, so these forms the four different pies and the domains. I'm going to move into specifically into each of these domains just to give you a sense, right? So analytical, what is analytical, right? Tend to be a clear thinker, logical problem solver. Approach tends to be data driven, rational, and learns mainly by mental analysis. Loves to ask the question why. So if you ever send this person a meeting invite, the person will ask, what's the goal of this meeting? Why are we even having this meeting? If the purpose is not clear, it will irritate that person a lot. And that person don't feel that it is a valuable meeting to attend, right? Any kind of arguments or conversations need to be backed up by logic and data, right? You need evidence that can prove, or even by logic, right? If the logic is not sound, you get doubt in your analysis. Okay, and let's look at a quick example like that, right? So if you just give people an exercise, these are the instructions. The analytical would love to find who is the source of the person who mentioned that quote, right? Because they will go and find out the credibility, who said it. Okay, structural, right? Very practical, tend to be practical, very predictable, enjoys guidelines and directions given by others, love to make and follow plans carefully, and likes closure. Structure tends to think around next steps. What are the step-by-step action they have to take? Like to close off the loop in terms of like, oh, if there's anything open that's not clear, they will ask very close-ended questions. Like, is it me or you who's doing it? Or what's the next step? Who's going to follow up? Okay. So imagine this is just an agenda that we set out for the day. Tend to works well that we usually use, right? Now think about this, right? Structure love the individual timings and the breakdown of it as well. Okay, so every detail, they love it. To them, it satisfies their need, right? This is not complete for them. Okay, so social enjoys helping others. That's more of the emotional side as well, really based on gut feelings, very relational. Usually they are intuitive about people's feelings. There's empathy and likes working with people and through others. Okay, so I think there's some bit of research that talks about the social, and most people would know, right? There's a brain gut and microbiome relationship. You know that your brain is not the only one that has a lot of neurons. Your gut also has a lot of neurons, right? The enteric nervous system, right? And much of the research has shown that a lot of people who rated where they are socially dominant tend to go with intuition. A lot of things is like, okay, based on gut feeling, it's just not right, right? So they know when to switch. Okay, so this is just another example. Okay. And then lastly, one of the things is a conceptual, very imaginative, intuitive about ideas. Love is a visionary, likes to set out the vision in the next 5 to 10 years, likes to imagine the future, even though the future is not very concrete, as long as it's very abstract, they are still able to imagine it. Enjoys unusual and usually learns by experimenting, right? Even the idea is not fully formed yet. Okay, so with that, that forms the clear sort of the thinking styles and patterns of behavior attributes that we can see. Okay, so just one last thing before I'll stop is the Emergenetics is about preference and not really about competence or ability lah. So you like what we always mention, you can perform it, but it's just whether you like it or not lah, or whether you prefer it, right? And that affects the amount of energy that you use and exert lah to do this activity. Okay, so that is a typical. Should I mention anything? Okay, never mind. I think I'll just stop here just to get a sense. I think this is enough lah for the conversation. And then maybe to those who are new, like Shah and Ethan is not new, right? Do you have any questions so
It's,
far around? Just for the understanding before we move into talking about the differences between StrengthsFinder and EG. Okay, sure seems clear.
You know, I have my coaching session with you, so I am quite clear about my own emergenetics, especially because I'm third and so extreme to begin with. I think the extreme characters allows me to understand a bit more to begin
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. So maybe I think to start it off, Ethan, you could share, right? How was the experience like in terms of understanding EG as a psychometric tool, right? Because we're going to talk about advantages, disadvantages, and since you are the person who just last went through, right? What did you find was, I mean,
yeah.
useful that you've seen from this profile that's different from others?
And in a
Um,
way, he's the least biased one, right? Because I'm strength certified, you're Emergenetics certified. He's the one that receives both sides from both of us. So
Yeah, I just learn from everybody and I don't care. I go back to the fact that I think everything. So I go back to the fact that I think the beautiful part that we've gone through for the last few weeks of this shootout is that we go back to the fact that nothing is fixed. Nothing is like you are this person and therefore this is going to be you for the future. I mean, it's always about using it and utilizing it for coaching, for development of self. I think that's one of the things that I really am always reminded with every time I touch a new psychometric, because it doesn't define you. It just helps you understand how you already come from. So that's where I think with emergenetics, because of the separation between the thinking and the behavior, I found that very useful because it already starts separating it, the demarcation between the two lines, the two ends of behavior and thinking creates a very clear distinction between the two sides. I think that's very useful to, as a person, because a lot of times people mix the two, right? Like behavior equals thinking. We
Yep.
all know that that's not really true because, I mean, the equals thinking, because everybody might do the same behavior for all the different reasons. Wrong, but like other people are like some people would not litter in Singapore because it's the rule. Some people don't litter because they think it's right. So the differences and the reasonings are very different. And I think emergent ethics is very useful for me to think like this. Where I would say so I was dealing with StrengthsFinder and knowing StrengthsFinder for a good 2-3 years before I went through that session with you. So the difference is, for me, StrengthsFinder has always been all about where do you lead yourself to, where you coach yourself towards, what are your strengths, how do you build it, how do you actually focus on these things. Whereas Emergenetics is almost like here's your thinking style, here's your preferences, this is how, like, do you want to do something about it? Like there's no like clear coaching path right off the bat, like just from the words alone. But it's very useful even just to begin where you are. For me, that's the difference between the two. Because like again, right, strength gives you this ability to go like, okay, these are where my talent teams are. This is why I have a tendency to look at these things. Like, okay, rather than focusing on my weaknesses, which is, which is where StrengthsFinder really talks about, right? Like, rather than focusing on my weaknesses, understand how to utilize my talent themes to turn them into strengths so that I can manage all the different types of situation. So I think this is where the differences really lie for me. At least the way that the coaching and the methodology is used as well.
nice. I think okay, so can I go next?
Yep. Sure, Alex.
He asked for permission. I'm so what's the one? Not so assertive.
Yeah.
Also
First
assertive,
start
we all know.
assertive. Peacekeeping.
Okay. So later we'll share our profiles. We've kind of prepared it for our virtual backgrounds. I like the simplicity behind emergenetics because it gives people a much, I mean, it's more complex than say MBTI and DISC, I think, because of the dimensions and the permutations that you have and the way that it's sliced. So I do kind of like it. Yet it gives some level of detail, right? Can go a little bit deeper in that. I do think that it's broad in a sense, and the difference between that and CliftonStrengths is that CliftonStrengths can identify the nuances and the motivations behind, say, certain expressions or certain ways of thinking, right? So, so for example, we look at someone who is gregarious in terms of the behavior. In the CliftonStrengths profile, the person might have woo, or might have communication, right? Or might have what else? Who else is gregarious? Maybe a little bit of command, self-assurance. So yeah, self-assurance right there, right? So what I find Emergenetics doesn't have is that motivation piece. And I think if we combine it with CliftonStrengths, we can kind of look at, okay, so what's driving that graciousness or the expressiveness? And I thought that was where the two can actually complement each other very well in terms of layering and seeing the different dimensions. And then, so like how Joseph, you and I work together, right? And it's quite interesting. It's not as apparent in CliftonStrengths. So I have like ideation, strategic, so I'm big picture, right? Whenever I do my workshops and create my materials, I tend to grow concepts, big picture, whereby I have the belief that, look, if people get the concept and get the principle behind things, they know how to apply it. And Ethan shaking his head, right? So the feedback people came back is, oh, can you give us more examples? Specifically, how do you do this? How is this done? And go like, isn't that obvious? Isn't that obvious? So that's where Jeffrey comes and said, no, it's not obvious. And that's because he's a lot more structural than I am. So that type of differences in the way that we think, I don't think come out as readily, right, in CliftonStrengths when you look at the talent teams. So the way that structure allows us to see certain things and certain dimensions more obviously. And that's kind of what I like about.
In fact, if we look at the top 5 right now, you wouldn't be able to see the difference between much difference between you and Jeffers, particularly straight off just looking at this.
You might need to look at the top 10.
Yeah. So like I'm just saying, it doesn't look as obvious, right? Like it's versus a straight up like structural thought process in Jeffers' thinking.
Well,
yeah.
I think
it takes time. I think like strength might take some time to first understand, right, before you can interpret. Whereas I think in EG is slightly more intuitive after once people get it. The other thing I also think that is as on teams, right, in terms of working with other people, it becomes very strong because it now becomes like very easy for the other person to understand. And I think Emergenetics has an assumption around cognitive diversity, which means that for a team to work effectively, right, you need all 4 domains to be well represented, right? So when we do in teams, we realize that, oh, if your whole team of 5 all analytical, right, then nobody is looking at the other questions, nobody is thinking about the people, nobody is thinking about the future and sustainability, nobody is thinking about what's the next step. Everybody is talking about data, right? So when you look at a team, then it becomes very powerful, right? From a thinking style, then you know that there's cognitive diversity added to the conversation. From the behavior attributes, here's the interesting thing. So if let's say I know within this group, I know Ethan is third expressiveness, and I know he will do all the talking most of the time, right? So I know, like, let's say Alex is are you first third expressive? No. Okay, yeah, second third. Right. So for sure's benefit, right, when we talk about first third is from 0 to 33, because based on a score of 99 lah. Then from 34 to 66, that's second third, and then 67 onwards is third lah, based on the percentile score. And then if let's say somebody who's first third expressiveness, I haven't heard of that voice, I'll be more deliberate in calling that person out to hear his views, because that person just won't speak up, right? Or prefer not to speak up. Likewise, if let's say there's a somebody who is a third expressive and third assertiveness, right? We know who, right? And just constantly giving the views and assert his views throughout, right? As somebody who's leading the meeting, I'm also aware that that person who are first third assertiveness and first third expressiveness, who's not going to say anything, wants to maintain harmony and peacekeeping, As a leader, I will be more deliberate to call that person out. So it gives that level of understanding and perspective, especially in working in groups or in teams. So that's what I like about in EG.
It's faster to catch, I think.
It's faster to catch, yeah.
Right.
Immediately usable.
Sure. What do you think? I know we've been talking quite a bit. Just wanted to make sure you're part of the conversation as well. Included. You can't see included in here, but included is my top 12.
I don't know much about Emergenetics. That was part of the reason why I joined, was just so I could learn a little bit more about Emergenetics and the comparison with strength. So I'm just listening and absorbing. So thank you.
Okay.
Cool.
But sure, if you have any questions that what becomes more questions are Emergenetics, just feel free to share. Try my best to answer them. I see. Everybody is already changing.
Yeah. I'm starting to
so
my
we
structure
can kind
is
of
like.
see.
So I think one of the funniest parts is I think because of my results, I was laughing because my structure was so tiny. It's it's 2, right? So like everything else is like near 95, and then this is like a 5, right? So on the percentile of the mark of like the world, my structure was near 0. Like it will tire me out to think of like the next steps. I'm always a big picture person, even though
So if you look at the quadrants, right, that Jeffer showed, so you are abstract, divergent.
Yeah, he's abstract thinker and divergent thinking. So if you're ever in a conversation with him, right, he will just make it even more and more ideas, and you get the ideas brewing, right?
I'm not the most contextual person, yes.
You're not most context.
I'm not the most contextual person.
But also because he's so conceptual and so divergent, it's also quite apparent in the way that he takes different schools of thoughts and different concepts and he integrates them. Because when you go conceptual at higher level, that gives you that space to absorb things, right? Whereas if you go to what's the other one? Concrete.
Concrete, yep.
Right. When you go to concrete, that's where you go to specifics.
Yep.
So that's where you might find it harder to integrate certain things because they can be seen as distinct. So the ability to integrate things comes from the ability to see things at the conceptual level.
Yep.
And that's where I think Ethan does very, very well.
Yep, that's his strength. He does very well. He's very divergent. So if we need like new ideas, we can bounce him off. We realize that the war is not actually a war. And he will give us new entry points to different areas, especially for my profile, right, who tends to be more of a convergent thinker, right? If you ever see a lead meetings, right, that meeting is super task oriented, right? It's like, what's the next step? Who's following up? And that's the kind of conversation I have. Now, you might notice my social is a sliver, maybe not a sliver. And I realize this pattern shows up a lot because every time I send an email, I did not include the right people in there. Because that never came across my mind to see like who else do I need to include in the conversation. I usually just focus on including the person whom I'm in contact with, but I didn't include other stakeholders whom I think is important. And it doesn't come as a natural preference for me. I need to exert energy to think about it, which I don't prefer to do it. So that's what's interesting for me, whereas I think for maybe Alex and Ethan, that's not your model of the world.
James just commented, like my business partner just commented, he knows it very well that I'm completely decontextualized, right? The reason why I can do what I do is because I'm super decontextualized.
And the other thing I think we haven't quite talked about for Emergenetics is how the bi-model, tri-model. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So okay, so we say most people are a bi-model or tri-model, but there are specific groups of people who are uni-model, which means if let's say out of the rating scores that you gave yourself, if you more than 23%, we call it that's a dominant trait or dominant quadrant that you are having, right? So like if you notice, Alex and Ethan and myself, we are all tri-model, right? Because for me it's analytical, conceptual, and structural, right? So these are my dominant domains, right? Whereas Alex is analytical, conceptual, and social, whereas structural didn't fit the dominant one. Ethan is which one again? Analytical, conceptual, and social as well, right?
Same as me.
Yeah,
Same
it's
as
just that
me.
his structure is just tend to be very
almost non-existent.
almost
Yeah.
non-existent.
Sorry, I had to redo the whole thing because I realized I put another person's top 5, and I was like, wait, why is the strategic number 1?
Yeah. And I think I just want to mention the diametric opposites. I think this is a good time to introduce. So most of the time when we have trimodal or bimodal thinking, right? The diametric opposites is the one that give us slightly a bit of a dilemma or tension. So for example, analytical and social, they are diametric opposites as well as conceptual and structural, right? So if we go in our head, right, okay, this is the logic, right? This is the purpose of the meeting. That person didn't show up. Then suddenly you went to social like, but that person just had a bad day. The person had somebody who, the child is just fall sick. I need to empathize. I shouldn't be so hard on that person. Then you went back to the analytical, but the person just didn't show up. The person just didn't deliver the result that we want. So these are the type of conversations that you might have in your head if let's say you have dominant analytical and social, but one of them will win eventually, right? But you just spend some time to bounce off. Likewise, in conceptual and structural, it could be also like, oh, that's a big picture. I love this idea. This idea is really cool. Let me stay with it. Then after that, you realize there's a deadline. I need to deliver something. I need something very concrete.
Yeah.
I need to produce something. And what's the next step? I need to produce something, right? And then after you went back, like, okay, I don't care about deadline. Then okay, let me just buzz in this experience. I want to test out something new. So you bounce off back and forth that thoughts inside your head, right? And these are diametric opposite. Now, what it means for us is if you have slightly more trimodal, you tend to take more time to think, right? There's an assumption here lah. But as compared to somebody who is unimodal, who just can you imagine somebody who's unimodal structural, every time in the meeting they'll tune off around everything except for the next step.
Out of me.
Yes. Except for the next steps. Right. So these are some ways to look at it, right? Now the other thing I just want to pay attention is the thinking styles of Alex and Ethan is very similar, right? Only that they are both trimodal, analytical, conceptual, and social, correct? But because they are Ethan, your head need to move a bit.
Yeah, move so that they can compare.
Yeah. So you can see, sure can compare, right? But you look at their behavior attributes, it's so different that even though the thinking sometimes may look the same, but the way they show up is also very different.
So right. Just to orientate share a little bit, the first one right on top is expressiveness. Second one is assertiveness, and the third one is flexibility. So the higher the number, the more expressive or more assertive or more flexible you are, right?
Yep. So I'm assertive, expressive, and flexible.
And I'm kind of close to the middle for all three.
I'm probably the most introspective. Only the second assertiveness is also like second, third, right? And just barely hit that mark. Very peacekeeping consensus, and that shows up a lot in my approach as well, right? And I'll tend to ask for people's views, and as long as like, okay, both Alex and Ethan agree, I'm okay.
Actually, come to think of it, so I know we separate the thinking styles and the behavioral styles, right? The behavioral styles, the louder they are, I think, the more we express ourselves. So I don't mean that in terms of just expressiveness, right? So if I exert myself more, then people kind of know what I think. Whereas if I just kind of go ahead with what everybody else says, they don't know what I think, and things like that. So I think the higher the numbers are for the behavioral, the more obvious it is in terms of how people can see how I think. However, if like Jeff, like yours, because most of them are like first, third, people probably have a harder time trying to figure out what you're thinking and how you're thinking. Just something that came to me as we were talking about it. Would that be true?
We'll look more at that in terms of percentile. Like remember that percentile score in a chart. So I can give you an example of
So I mean is that when we are more expressive, when the behavioral patterns are stronger, it's easier for people to see the thinking. Whereas if you are first, third for everything, it's harder for people to see, your analytical structure, the way you think doesn't come out as obviously to people because of the behavioral attributes. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. You can see from the work that people produce lah, from the work, correct, right? From the work that people do. It's just when you're talking, I think what you're saying is in terms of a verbal conversation. Then of course, yeah, I can tell more from Ethan because he will assert his way around the whole conversation, right? Then we can hear him very loud.
You also hear my complex abstract thoughts and decontextualized behaviors.
Yes.
I find that rather ironic that we are doing this conceptual now. That's my classic statement from me. But actually, by the way, I just want to bring in Mel. Hi, Mel.
Hi, Mel.
Hi, Mel.
Brought it out of context again.
See,
Not in the social
divergent. This is divergent thinking.
Yeah, this is my strength. Because individualization plus ideation, oh my god, like super divergent. Mel, just wondering, have you dealt with Emergenetics before?
No. Is it the one with the percentile? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, you're looking at it.
The graph one, the pie chart.
Yeah, the pie chart. Yeah.
Oh, the pie chart. I think I must have done it before, but I don't have it on me. But the one on the right, I did it. I did the test just now.
Oh,
yeah, I haven't read the report. Yeah.
Oh, you did StrengthsFinder just now. Okay.
Yeah, I bought the test of Gallup. I think through the link that Alex sent me like quite a while back. Yeah, I did it just now, but I had no time to read the report.
Okay, we'll talk about strengths, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I'm tuning in from food court now.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Okay, yeah.
So, so this is kind of where I think that, when the behavioral attributes are a bit more stronger. So like what Ethan says, right? Because he's very expressive, we can hear whether he's talking in terms of relationship, is he talking in terms of conceptual, is he talking in terms of tangible, right? So because he's so verbal, we can actually hear the way he thinks.
Yep. Yeah, we can. I mean, in a conversation, right? So if people don't know about all these thinking styles and behavior attributes, of course, usually the person who's the loudest, who's seen to be doing the most work, right? I mean, in a typical setting, right?
Seen to be,
right?
Because it doesn't matter. Yeah, I know. I do a lot of work, but I recognize that people think I do more work than I actually do. Even though I do a lot of work. So
in your head, right? In your head. A lot of concepts that came out, right? You're integrating, right? So that is work as well. So interestingly, I even in the place where I come from, right? I have teams that go through Emergenetics once a year, every year, just to, because there are turnovers and people come and go.
Okay.
So every year they redo the Emergenetics to re-recognize, to use it as more like a team connection lah, a team building and team bonding approach, right? I also have trained in particular. I don't know why insurance agents love to come and find me, but in particular they have adapted this approach to their own style of the approach to comms to people, right? To understand their clients, right? And how they sell portfolios and policies, right? Imagine somebody who is tend to be analytical. They like the data, so they know what to feed. Right. And then you also have met insurance agents who hi bye you like friends, need to know you, need to meet you face to face, need to treat you coffee, ask you about your family, things like that. The social side of the house, right? That's the social side. Then of course, if you have analytical and conceptual, you not only need to show data, you need to project 5 years down the road what my investment will look like, 20 years down the road. You need to show that to somebody who's conceptual because he needs to see the big picture and the long-term view. And structure, they will read through your fine print if you give them the policy. So that helped them to adapt their approach. I think I didn't realize that, but it was through their feedback. They told me that was one of the most useful things they got out of Emergenetics, because it was easy to understand.
I think the ease to understand is one of the key things that people look out for in using a profiling tool. I've seen that many times. One of the reasons why people use DISC, MBTI, and even the SAF, our Singapore Armed Forces, right, uses TetraMap.
TetraMap on the fire.
Yeah.
I
So
don't know what's TetraMap, but yeah.
we can talk about TetraMap at some point of time. But it's
another profiling tool?
It's not
As
profiling tool.
another.
It's similar to the DISC, but there are different ways of looking at it. It touches on, well, are you earth, water, fire, or air?
Okay, so it's Captain Planet.
Similar. we can talk a little bit about that. But for those of you interested in TetraMap, can go online and do a research. There are quite a number of models or images which show up to kind of show you. Some of it are quite similar, like the abstract, concrete.
Yeah.
And so there's some similarities there.
We'll go check it out.
The other thing that I do like about the bi-model, tri-model thing that we talk about is this, right? I remember reading in my report, or someone was sharing with me, that when you're bi-model or tri-model, it means that you're more able to bridge different styles of thinking for different people. So when you have people who are maybe bi-model or uni-model, then the person who is tri-model or quad model is better able to help different people see each other's perspective and understand each other better.
Yep, that is true, Alex, because you understand the person's world and where the person is coming from. Likewise, in the behavior attributes as well. So those who are in between, which is the second, third, tend to be the mediators, because they understand why, let's say, Ethan asserts so much and why Alex might not assert so much, very quiet. But in between, they are contextual, they are context dependent, right? Under certain circumstances, they'll assert. And if there's any conflict, they tend to be the natural mediators to come and say, hey, and try to explain, right? That's usually what we do, right? Try to explain, hey, actually, where it's coming from is this. So that forms like the, so even for the thinking styles, it works the same way.
And the other thing that I learned from my Emergenetics profile is that when you are quad tri-model, and I think CliftonStrengths doesn't quite have intensity. So you kind of make a guess if you unlock your full 34 based on your talent teams, right? So how well distributed are they across the different domains? But what this tells me is that I can think a lot because I have to go through at least 3 styles of thinking. And that makes me kind of slower, I guess, because I need to think through in different parts.
No, I don't think any slower just because I'm tri-model.
Say again?
I don't think any slower just because I'm tri-model.
You think a lot, dude. And then you go back, and then 1 week later, hey guys, I got this new thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And then 1 week later, hey, I've just uncovered this fantastic breakthrough. Okay. And you do that week after week. So it's quite funny.
Is it slow?
I don't suppose it's slow, but I think slow is relative, right? But you take a lot of time to think through a lot of different dimensions.
It is at the same time, it's also that you think more completely lah.
Or try to.
Or
minus the structural.
I mean, you do tend to. It's just that it probably comes as a later, right? After, not afterthought. maybe that might be the second last or the last thing.
I need the social
about, right?
aspect in order for me to bring in the structural. So what I do is I actually leverage upon the fact that most of my friends are structural. Like you guys are more structural than me. So I'll use you guys as a reference point for me to build the structural elements.
Yep. Yeah. So Ethan brought up a good point because we talk about Emergenetics in terms of preference, right? But it doesn't mean that we cannot use our strength areas to fill in the areas that we currently don't see or prefer, right? So for example, if social is my less preferred domain, logically I know that social is my less preferred domain, correct? So by logic, I would also know that I have to reach out somebody who has that preference to help me to look at that. So based on my analytical and logic, I would reach out to Alex to do it. But I come from a place from logic and not from the intuition that I need to reach out to Alex because of socially, I feel that, okay, I should reach out to him now.
Yeah, I feel you.
And I think that people with social, and Ethan, I'm not sure about whether it's the same for you. The intuition part, there's also my empathy part, right? So empathy depends on missing. So I get hunches when like Ethan comes to me with a problem or story, usually involving some other people. I get hunches about what people might be thinking or going through. And I say, hey, you know, this person, based on what you tell me, the behavior, the person might be thinking or having this perception. Then I'll get him to, okay, why don't you test it out by, you know, doing something else and see what the response is, or going to speak to that person. So the hunches part is quite big for my social aspect. And I think it comes from my empathy, more relationship building talent teams.
And Ethan has that too, right? Intuition, right?
Yeah, because actually for me, I think a lot of my intuition related stuff is also related back to the individualization and self-assurance. So like the ability to relate to people. But I think if I pull up my top 10, you start seeing command, maximizer, a lot of this social aspect with the individualization involved makes me go like, I need to adjust to each person. I need to make sure that like each thought about a person is really thought about.
And so I think for Ethan, it's really his individualization. For me, it's probably both empathy and individualization. And that helps me to relate to people differently. And I also have relator in my top 10.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, just curious, are there any sort of I don't know, maybe dilemma or tension that you face when you're thinking around a problem, right? And could it have been one of these domains bouncing off one another?
For me, when I do my work, I do gravitate to conceptual more, right? That's also because of like strategic and ideation number 6. So I like big picture, I like concepts, and that's where I go to. I'm reluctant to move to the structural part until the conceptual is clear. Right. So if you don't give me a big picture of exactly what the vision is, what we're moving towards, then there's no point talking about structure, right? Because we could then be climbing the ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall, metaphorically speaking. So that conceptual part that creates that clarity becomes important for me, without which it's very hard for me to move because I think it's a waste of time.
Mine is the biggest drop for me is whenever I do things for the sake of doing it. So if you're following the education system in Singapore, for example, and you're trying to just finish the modules, I hate that. You tell me step by step steps, I'll be screw you, right? So if you tell me like the number of times in the recent weeks where I started getting annoyed by people, because I think in my business, the first thing I always look for is if the person goes, what can I do to support? And they do, right? So I think even within the three of us, we're always going like, what can we do to support this? As a pure structural person, they always go, what are you going to give me so that I'm going to do it for you? Right? That I see a lot of that. I hear a lot of that because they don't look at the big picture. They're not looking at the analysis, like mono model, right? Like if I think of a person as mono model structural, I want to bludgeon the person to death sometimes because the person will ask the dumbest questions, in my opinion.
Is that necessarily a structural trait though? What can you do for me?
It's a mixture. They're always looking at what do I get for doing this next step. They're always looking at the next day, the next week. What is the next task that I need to do within this time such that I can be. So like the people I work best with are the people with a lot of conceptual first. Then the analytical, then the social, and then so it goes like, if the person cannot get the concepts, I can't work with the person, like full stop, like it's straight off the bat, because the opposite side is structural, right? So this is whenever the tussle appears, I can relate to social people. I have ability to relate to them. I might die in the process of like, I was just sharing with my friends, I met this really amazing person that makes me want to die because she cannot talk philosophy. Like everything was so like, am I going to take a lesson for music? This was regarding music. What I want to do now, what I want to make sure of the next day. They cannot pull any further than the next week. and it becomes something which is like, so these are the problems I usually have. And then like if they lack analytical as well, then it's like it's just like that law, like which is a Singaporean way of saying things, right? And non-analytical people also kill me because they're just saying things just happen like this. Accept it, like kind of a behavior, but like so there's all these kind of structures and behaviors and these difficulties I face with regularly when I deal with people without these areas.
I'll see that slightly differently. I see that more in terms of difficulties relating because you were in that preference quadrant. But if let's say a pure structure or let's say unimodal structure, right? If they really work very well, they can complement you very well because they can say, hey, so Ethan, how do I translate this?
If they can stretch.
Yeah. So that also tells me in terms of a certain, because I feel that's beyond just emergenetics. That also talks a bit about values. Whether the person is in a similar values to you, right? But because there might be a difference of values, it might not be a good fit in that conversation as well. So I think there's a bit of that as well, lah.
Yeah. It's a bit of mindset as well, right? So like one of the guiding principles for strengths is that differences are good, right? So even in strengths language, people can start to ostracize people who are different, especially in groups, right? And go like, you are the only one that has, I don't know, in a group of relators, you have one woo. Yeah. And everyone goes like, oh, that social butterfly is so fake. You know, that kind of thing. So differences, when people look at it negatively, I like to say it's like, there's this saying that the tallest grass that's cut, right?
I hear what you guys are saying. Like, so then my struggle is with people refusing to stretch to accept my ways of looking at things, which includes the analytical or conceptual and rest. Whereas they only look for what they're looking for, which is often limited into like structural or social only or things like that.
So that's interesting. So that tells me in the realm of more about beliefs, right? Or whether, I mean, mindset and beliefs and what they value. And I think that also, remember one of our earlier conversations of why we use psychometric tool is because without which people naturally attribute to negative behaviors for the wrong reasons. And I mean, one of the things of using psychometric tool is also to shape their beliefs, right? To realize that, hey, actually, we are just different people lah. There's a new belief that's being installed, and you behave this way because of what? All the because of, in order to, therefore are naturally cause and effect statements lah, or which we call beliefs. And I do feel there's a part of that came out as well as we were talking about.
Yeah, that's a useful way of looking at it. I agree, actually, because I think for me, it always goes back to, are we adjusting? Are we understanding other people's point of view? I recognize that there's a little bit of a struggle whenever people are not able to stretch, in my opinion. In my world, it's like an unwillingness to move.
Well, actually, if we look at it from the profile perspective, right, it might be easier for you because you're tri-model at least. So, the stretching, maybe for you, the majority of stretching comes in the structural part. So for someone who's bi-model or uni-model, I would think it's a lot harder for them to stretch.
It is, it's definitely harder. So I give you an example. Recently, I had a colleague who's paired with me, right? So we're both like program leads to run the program. And she's extremely particular about all the details, the next step, the operation stuff, right? Whereas we are supposed to be learning designers. We're looking at, okay, what's the design? So my analytical came out, right? And my conceptual, right? What do I want to see this whole program? What will people feel, and what will we look like as people go through this program? Then my analytical will come in like, okay, what's the learning outcomes for each of these segment, right? And apparently she could not see those. To her, when I speak with her, I told her, I reminded her, and she still went back to operational. She still went back to, okay, when's the next thing? When do we cater lunch? When do we cater? So all those little details. So At some point in time, I got a bit frustrated, and apparently the whole department got frustrated because people feel like we didn't hire an admin person, we hire a learning and design specialist who needs to think. But at one point in time, I was thinking about, okay, since you're so structural, right? Let me draft a SOP of how to think learning and design. Because I also have structure. So I went to do it for her. Step 1, what do you need to think about? Step 2, what you need to think about. And then you know what she said to me at one of the feedback to the managers, she said that I'm the only person who understood her in the company.
Yes. But I mean, I'm just going to add in another point here, right? Because this is also the struggle of a person with multiple thought processes. You have to take the responsibility for other people to stretch.
Yeah.
Like, there is a huge struggle I have because as also a person who functions the way I do, right? I realize I have to stretch a lot just to accommodate other people so that they can understand other people.
Yeah, and that's the function of the try model and the quad model we just talked about, right? So because of that, we end up bridging for other people, right? And that's that. So as we're having this conversation, a thought came to mind, right? That I think one of the things in CliftonStrengths when we start profiling people is that we help people to really appreciate that, hey, what you are, who you are is good, and there's a general acceptance. And the stretching part. So Ethan, I'm not quite sure, but the vibe I'm getting from you is when you say that, oh, people are not stretching, and they are, not stretching to other domains as much as you think they should, gives me a kind of a sense that maybe the Emergenetics profile doesn't help us to accept other people who they are as much as maybe how CliftonStrengths is able to. And off the top of my head, the word grace came to mind. Right? Like, have some grace for the poor chap who can't stretch.
So I would love to say that, but at the same breath, if you talk about emotional energy and weight, yeah, I can recognize this about a person. Maybe I need to work with multimodal person at this level. So on a managerial level, because especially when you're talking about working in a team and you're in charge of translating messages across board, and actually this might be exactly where Emergenetics might be useful. Because if I was in a technical role, for example, I was a technical role and I'm learning to be a manager, I need a social aspect in order for me to start managing the people below me, because I need to look at how each person plays their part. If I want to start building in the analytical conceptual part to get the buy-in of the people on a certain level, I need to stretch to that part too. There is all those elements that straight off the bat makes me click. Here comes the part. As a manager, I have to do that. The key part here is that if I was playing just a singular role within a company, roles and responsibility, right? I'm just supposed to do this, right? Is my way of thinking helping me in the process? For example, if I'm just purely doing admin and I'm following SOPs, structural is your best friend. Doesn't matter where you have to rest. If you don't have structural, you might die from the process like me, right? If I'm just purely doing admin and you ask me to follow SOPs, I might die. If I cannot improve the process, if I cannot do anything about the process, because my conceptual and analytical will start running through scenarios and everything. But that's exactly where it comes from. Like for me, it's also then down to communication as well, because I can speak structural to a person who's structural, but I have a lot of struggles going there. So I also recognize that I have a lot of fatigue dealing with pure monomodal structural people, for example, in that mode. So this is where this is useful for me in identifying key areas of weakness for me in terms of energy sapping or certain things. I can use here as a way of bridging the gap. Like strategic, I always build it out so that I can find a way of dealing with it. So my analytical and my conceptual can be satisfied. However, when it comes to structural, I still lose energy along the way. Does this make sense?
Yeah. So I'm hearing a couple of things. One is if you're basically you're saying when you're not in your preference zone, you zap more energy so you don't want to go there, right?
Yep.
The other point I hear you in terms of whether I just want to re-highlight the difference between preference and competence, right? And you could be extremely competent at doing admin work. It's just that you prefer not to do it.
Yes.
And doing in the long term may just make you want to jump to another different role, correct?
Yes.
But it doesn't mean we talk sometimes we talk as if uni model doesn't have the resources to stretch, but it's not true. It's just that they need to use a different strategy to stretch. For instance, like if structural tend to think about structure, want to stretch to look more at analytical thinking, right? He or she might need a checklist of questions to think about analytical, like because naturally the person don't think about those questions, but what they can do is prepare a checklist after checklist of what I need to think about to remind them of, right? And then because structure, they can schedule it in their calendars and things about meetings of when to think about it, what steps I need to go through. So they do have that capacity to do that as well, or let's say that using that preference to reach out to other areas, right?
We also have with us Valerie. Just want to make sure that we have her join the conversation as well. So,
did Valerie took EG before?
No, I didn't.
Ayo, you missed that last time.
but apparently, someone she knows has taken it before.
Mel, you wanted to say something, is it?
Can I ask a quick question? What's bimodal, trimodal? I think I must have missed out. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at this pie chart over here, right? This little circle that all of us have this circle. When we say bimodal, it means that the person has a dominant preference in two of the domains. In a pie chart, usually you have 100%, right? So if you're more than 23% or more, then we call that a preference, right? Or preference. So in my case, I'm a trimodal because analytical, conceptual, and structural are all beyond 23%. So we call it in preference. Whereas my social is below that, right? So in that case, that's why I'm called trimodal. Same with Alex and Ethan. It's just that their trimodal is different. Alex, if you shift your head away a bit. Alex is analytical, conceptual, and social, right? So his structure almost reached in preference, but based on the numbers, he didn't lah. Yeah. Okay. And then if you look at Ethan one, that sliver of green over there, that's structural is something that maybe he doesn't consider the next step that comes naturally to him, or he needs to be deliberate about it.
Structural means regimented, is it?
I mean, I would
follow the
guidelines, follows the rules. So if you look at the four, there are different type of questions you ask, right? So analytical will ask about the why, and structural will ask about the how, social will ask about the who, and structural and conceptual is like for whom or for what purpose, for the larger for the next 5 years, what it looks like. Those type of questions are different when we talk about different domains.
Okay, thank you.
So Joseph, I have the report. So I'll just remove the name and we can show the report and let Joseph do some interpretation for you. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, he's right next to me.
Then I don't even need to like blanco the thing. Okay, but here we go.
you even take a black and white photo.
Okay, so this is the profile. Joseph, go.
Yeah, so I mean, on first cut you can see is a trimodal, right? Conceptual, structural, and social, right? And social is definitely the strongest preference. Even if you look at the percentile score of social, that's 95 percentile. So definitely intuitive in relating to people, right? And then also think probably the asking around analytical questions why tend to come later, tend to relate to people who first and who's in the room. Of course, also okay with structure as well as conceptual lah. in terms of this thinking. Now, behavioral attributes looks like, yeah, very gregarious. Assertiveness is sort of second, third. Sounds like Ethan. Welcomes change, right? So, yeah, that means very animated in his way of interacting with other people. Sometimes can assert his view and very flexible when you propose new change to him.
I think if you put the two of them on stage in a talk show, it'll be very entertaining.
Who and who?
The person that you're referring to on this
Who is the second person you're referring to on the talk show?
Ethan. Yeah, so Val, does that sound like him?
I guess it's because he has a lot of influencing talent themes in his top 10.
Yeah.
In his top 5, there's communication, and there's activator, and there's woo, and there's also positivity, which is a relationship building talent theme. So with all of these, I guess there's a very strong preference for social. Yeah. As for structural, right, I think it's his achiever and his discipline that is contributing to this. Yes, he's the one who plans all our itinerary when we go traveling, where we are supposed to go, where we will be the next day. So I guess his structural domain is pretty well, And analytical, I'm more of the analytical one. If I foresee, if I were to take Emergenetics, right, my conceptual will be the lowest. I have difficulty in going into the creative realm. So for me to get to that place, I have to ask a lot of questions so I can imagine what the person is envisioning. So if the person is not communicating to me, I'll just keep asking a lot of questions to know the details of every single what the person is.
So very interestingly, I like what you're saying, because you said that you will ask a lot of questions in order to be creative, right?
Correct.
And that is an example of using the analytical preference and still try to be creative.
Yes.
So it's not that you can't be creative, right? That's a competence, but you're just using your preference to help you get there.
Yes.
Wes?
Based on this, this person is actually a concrete divergent thinker, right?
Yeah, concrete divergent. In that sense, more concrete. You look at the very high intensity on the social, right? Tends to think about people's feelings. All the influencing skill came in lah. The who, right? All the who question, who is in the room, how does people feel? How does people feel? Take care of people's feelings, and probably like to engage in small talk to ask people a thing, because like to learn about what people is doing, what people are up to, and that comes naturally for him. I suppose of him, yeah.
You agree? Yes.
And tends to be the one that also talks a lot more than in a group.
Like if we congregate during cell group, right? He's the one who approaches everybody. He will try to win everybody in the room.
Yeah.
And this was actually noticed by our cell group leader. So it is very the behavioral traits are very prominent here when it comes to social compared to me.
And that's also because of his woo, right?
Yes, definitely.
So actually, we compare again. We talk about the motivations behind the behavioral attributes, right? So this person has 90 on his expressiveness, and Ethan, yours is 95. So both are gregarious, right? But the motivations are very, very different. For Val, this person, trying not to name names since he's not on. He is expressive, but is driven by winning others over, talking to people. That's that motivation, right? Communication. Yes. Whereas for Ethan, even though you are gregarious, it's not about winning people over. It's more of like exerting yourself, being expressive, sharing people your thoughts, right? So that's the part about CliftonStrengths that I do like, is that or rather the layering, right, of the two, is that while you see certain behavioral attributes, it tells you what the motivation and what the drivers behind those are. And that's what I like about it.
So I think they do complement each other very well.
Yeah. I agree. I think the fun part for me is like this whole session has always like reminded me. Again, I go back to the fact that yes, preferences is not capability. I think that's one thing that also StrengthsFinder also talks a lot about. Your talent teams does not define you as a person as to how you're gonna do everything. I think this is where it goes back to the same frameworks around like how do you manage with your way of looking at things.
And I think in CliftonStrengths, again, people think that their report is their strengths, but it's really their talent, which is the pattern of thinking, feeling, or behaving, right? So it's a pattern, but not necessarily competence. So I would equate competence more with a strength than with a talent.
Yep.
Yeah, so I just want to go back to one of Ethan's earlier point is how does Emergenetics naturally move forward in terms of coaching, right? And one of the ways in which I've already sort of covered is you can coach people from the strength. You can also coach people from the blind spots that you naturally don't think about that you need to pay more attention to. But of course, if it's from the strength area, then of course, so let's say just now, who was the report that you pull up, right? The analytical splice is probably that person is probably
12%.
lesser.
Yes, 12%.
Yeah. 12% is not too bad, right? So if let's say the person is a sliver of maybe like 3%.
2%.
Yeah, 2%, right?
For structural.
And let's say and Ethan can just delegate someone else to do the structural, right? Because social can do that, right? That's a preference. And he is 9 and he's third assertive. He don't mind delegating to someone else. He's third expressive as well, so he can do it very well. And there are some ways in which you can do it to help yourself lah. Either getting other people to do it for you, using the social one, or using other preference to sort of support the task that you're doing. Okay, so even like for structure, we talk about like for me, right? Checklist and to-do list structure, it sits well with me, but I know it doesn't sit well with everybody. So if somebody like my wife is conceptual social, right? Is a bimodal divergent thinker, and I'm analytical and structural, right? So every time we get into conflict, usually is logic versus social, right? You didn't take care of my feelings. No, but that's not right, right? There's not financially sound, right? The budget is not it's not practical. Don't know whether you all hear that in your own conversations as well. Then you say like I don't care, I'm not gonna talk to you because you make me angry. It's like, what kind of logic is that? Like, what is it making you angry? It's not even logical. Let's be real and fix the problem. And the problem is you now, not me. Okay, then you go around that spin wheel, right? So, but at the same time, she also compliments me in a lot of way. In which, for example, many time in which in a group setting, right, she tend to be the person who go out there and start to make small talks and reach out to people, right? And I tend to be the one who go behind the scenes and plan, okay, what needs to be done, how much budget we allocate to host people, what kind of food should we get, right? Then you go and do the reaching out to people. But fortunately, because in my strength finder, I also got relator lah. So once she bring one person in, I can persuade and convert in a way lah. To relate, to build a deeper relationship lah. So that's how we work together lah. So this has a lot of use in your relationship as well. So if you think about it, if any conflict is usually one of the preference is in conflict with the other preference, right? Yeah. So typically EG can be used also for relationship coaching, because you get two couples to do it, then you realize what they have been arguing about. For individual coaching as well, to increase the repertoire of different ways to do things using your in preference, as well as teams, in which we talk about understanding teams.
So emergenetics is more about the way of thinking of a person. Like for Strengths Finder, is a lot about motivations, about
Talents.
yeah. What about Emergenetics? Like the ASC is about communication. I can stretch to a D when I want to, but it's not my preference. But what about in this test?
It's more of thinking style. So thinking style is behavior attributes. Of course, the implication downward is also affect communication because of the way you think, right? And naturally, based on like analytical thinking, you ask a lot of why questions. Conceptual thinking is like what it looks like 5 years down the road. Social is who is in the room, and structure is how we're gonna do it lah. And let's say a given problem you need to solve something. Let's say you book a trip, right? Let's say you plan a trip, right? What are the first question that you gravitate to? Why are we going on this trip? Then that tells you your in preference already, right? So that tells you analytical, right? Because my first question that I ask myself is usually why. What's the purpose of this trip? Whereas if let's say you're social in preference, you tend to ask, if somebody invites you, yeah, who's going? Oh, as long as Alex is going, I'll be there. I don't really care about the why, right? Because I just want to bask in that his presence and talk and relate to him.
Okay.
Is that clearer?
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that sound like your friend?
My friend. Okay. Yes. Who is going to be there?
Yeah. Or a typical meeting, right? Meeting agenda, right? That one everybody very familiar with. Right? You send out a meeting without agenda, some people will ask. You send out with an agenda without timing, right? The structural person will also ask. How much time are we going to discuss the first item? Right? If you don't have an agenda, the analytical people ask, what's the purpose of this meeting? Is it for discussion? Is it for information? Or is it for approval? Right? So that's why now your meeting agenda got for purpose. What's the purpose? Your meeting agenda got timing because the structure people need.
Correct.
And the social will go and look at the list of who is in that meeting.
Yep.
Oh yes. Like for me, I didn't intend to join this session until I remembered that Ivan, sorry, he's my husband. he has Emergenetics profile. So the why is very important for me. If the why is not there, I will not show up.
Yes. Yes. So you sort of can tell. I sort of can tell that the analytical is definitely one of your in preference lah.
Yes. Analytical is number 8 for me as well.
Yeah. Then Ivan is probably sitting beside you because you're here lah.
Yes.
that could be the social thing.
Because of social.
Social, right?
But he's also interested.
He's also, yeah.
I mean, if not, he wouldn't take the test and bring it out as a topic, right?
His school made him do one.
Oh.
I think it's quite expensive to do Emergenetics. That's why I never do it in the first place.
Is it really
Yeah.
expensive?
It's 80 something bucks lah.
Yeah, but because to me, I'm so used to
paying a lot lah.
all psychometric profiles. So for me, it's like this, yeah.
Yeah. You should take. Then you can look at relationship profiles. Very fun.
Then I need to introduce you to another profile called Soundwave.
Communication.
Me communication. Okay.
No, it'll be interesting to see the voices that you use when you talk. Okay, so on questions of time, we have, see, my structural can come out too. Questions of time. So maybe what we can do is, I know that majority of the time is Ethan, Jeff, and myself been speaking. So I'd like to hear from the rest. What were your takeaways from today's conversation? What's interesting to you? And then I'll hand the time back over to Ethan, who will help us to summarize. So maybe we can go with Shen.
I can go first. So with Emergenetics, about it being a preference versus actual skill or your motivation behind things. So it's an add-on tool, if you will, to blend with strengths and or other assessments. So it's just interesting to learn about Emergenetics. I've heard about it, but I've never used it myself, or I've never completed it either. So, so it's interesting to see what is behind it. So thank you.
Is that something that you'd be keen to take up for yourself?
I'm sorry?
Is that something you'd be keen to take for yourself, Emergenetics?
It is interesting. We, the corporation that I'm a part of, we use another assessment that blends in some similar approaches or some similar things. It is more behavior driven, but it also provides a little bit of the thinking and preferences and as well as approach. So that's the tool that I've used the most and that I'm the closest to. But this one is interesting too.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. Mel. No, we can't hear you. No, sorry, still can't hear you. We can see your mouth move. Let's move over to Val first, and then Mel, if you can join us later, please do. Val, your takeaway?
Sorry, I joined a little bit late. So my takeaway is they are both tools that can be used together, it seems. And Emergenetics is probably a simpler tool compared to StrengthsFinder because of you don't have to look at so many factors. For strengths, you have 34 talent themes. Not everybody is able to understand the tool as well. That's well. So I guess it is I'm able to relate how talent themes is able to show up in Emergenetics, which is very interesting to me. But due to the price, even though I'm very curious, I don't think I'll be taking the test though.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Val. And back to Mel, if your audio is working. No, it's not. All right. So Ethan, over to you.
All right. So I think we started a session with actually an introduction by Jeffers because clearly strengths group, right? So most of us know strengths. I think for me, the biggest, funniest part was the fact that I realized that I was using the wrong list of strengths. But that was bad. Okay. But I think one of the best parts about this is like we were actively using the different parts into the picture. So like we started with Emergenetics and talking about usage in communication. I think the layers, I think the best conversation parts that we've had were about how StrengthsFinder talked more about the why, whereas Emergenetics talked more about the how and the exact thinking processes and the elements, because Emergenetics takes on that more generic concepts, 4 categories, three expression behaviors, 3 behavioral aspects. It creates a certain amount of flex around certain ideas. Whereas StrengthsFinder, once you add it in, it becomes like you are able to see a person by, the reason why he acts this way is because of this. I mean, so even though people have similar profiles on Emergenetics, because of their strengths, you can tell that the reasoning might be different. Even though their thought preferences are this way, the reasoning is different, right? The way they're looking for things, what they're looking for changes along the way. And I think, but at the same time, the categorization of the behavior is still kind of sound. For example, with Valerie's story or with our sharing, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me myself is also about the fact that my biggest issue, that this is my biggest takeaway, my biggest issue is I want everybody to flex, right? That's my value as a person. I want everybody to flex because I believe in flexing, right? So that's what Jeffers was saying. But the good part about bimodal, trimodal, or more is the ability to translate through different things. I think it's the same when it comes to when you're looking at when you're able to start looking at people in different manners, in the same way that you're looking at strengths. But with this model, it gives you a little bit more like ability to agree with people because you don't have 34 different strengths to try to find which one matches with the other person. Here you have the standard models to kind of work from. So right off the bat, there's a lot easier to work with, a lot faster to work with, but the depth with StrengthsFinder is very different. And it's very complementary from what I'm hearing from everybody's own experience. I think it's very useful bunch of tools. I think I actually don't know Jeffers and Alex's takeaway from this session even. I realized. Can I have both of your takeaways too.
For me, I think it was a good reminder. So when Jeffers did the introduction to Emergenetics, in terms of the quadrants, right, the divergent, convergent, and then abstract and concrete thinking. So I kind of forgot about that one. I thought it's a good, useful way to think about profiles. I liked when Val shared Ivan's report, and we looked at it and started comparing, right? And how Valerie was very keenly attuned to how the talent teams were showing up in the Emergenetics report, all the way down to, oh, this is his woo, this is his analytical, this is his, what was it? Or the activator. So all the different talent teams, and she was able to match it to the Emergenetics profile. And so I think that shows the beauty of how it can complement and how it can help to show, and communicate the different aspects of a person's personality. And that was what I liked about today's session.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I also observe a number of patterns, right? Like what strengths cover and what Emergenetics does not cover. The motivation aspect is definitely not in the preference. I also get a bit more distinction between as I own self articulate it, right? There's like more distinction between preference, competence versus beliefs, right? And as we were talking about it, then it gets a bit more clear that where the boundaries are. Henry Cloud. And yeah, I think what comes across strongly to me also, like what Val pointed out in terms of there are certain correlations even between StrengthsFinder and Emergenetics. Like if the social preference is stronger, what talent teams tend to show up more as well, right? I mean, it's the other way around, right? As well as if, let's say, structure show up, then there might be some correlations because it's just the way they categorize and name it slightly different as they did the ratings, right? And I think what's so that's the sort of the thing that pops up for me lah. And lastly, probably just feeling very energized as I talk about Emergenetics.
Can I ask a question? So can I say that like StrengthsFinder is somewhat like an input in the process, and then for Emergenetics is somewhat of an output?
Actually, I would say that that's quite close. If I was to say that, and which is why actually next time we should talk about Enneagram versus StrengthsFinder as well. But that's a long story. But because I can see the similarities, I would say that even StrengthsFinder, from my point of view, becomes a lot about your stories. Like, for example, I love ideas. I always look for what's the purpose behind things and find the strategies around things. Learner, I love to just absorb knowledge. All these kind of different things, right? Like I love learning, like the process of learning. These are almost like stories that we tell ourselves from, at least my point of view. Whereas Emergenetics is almost like, what do I prefer? What do I want you to tell me? What do I need, or I prefer to be able to handle this or accept something more easily, or to be able to utilize it better. And then on the other part of the behavioral stuff. So it's almost like from the stories, you come up with the personality and thinking processes that which then creates the rational behaviors. For example, analytical. I need the logic, not the emotions. Don't tell me emotions, tell me logic, right? So for example, but that's related back to your stories back here, right? And then it relates back into then your final behavior. That's how I see it. Any other thoughts?
I see it as your talent teams actually informs you as to your thinking preferences as well as your behavior attributes, right? So, so for example, your conceptual is one of the dominant ones, right? Fairly big. And if I look at it, I look at ideation, strategic. Learner might be conceptual as well. So when I look at it, and then I can see that those are kind of what informs the way that you think conceptually, right? So it's the more specific element of it, and that's where I think it comes in. I'm very curious as to Val's question of what do you mean by input and output?
If you have done engineering modules before, there's this kind of like a diagram called the CPOC diagram. I don't know whether you guys are aware of this tool. It's a quality tool called CPOC diagram. So basically, there's this square, and then there's input and there's output. So it's just like you prepare coffee. The input is the coffee powder, the hot water, and the output is a cup of nice warm coffee. So from the way I see it, right, the motivations that comes from our talent themes is somewhat of an input, and what comes out as a result of the process that they go through is the behaviors that show up in Emergenetics.
Okay, I'm not sure if I use the analogy. I will use a different analogy since you talk about coffee. I would say that your coffee powder, the types of blends you have in your coffee, of beans and host everything, is your talent teams.
Okay.
You put all your talent teams into one coffee bag, which tells you whether you're conceptual, social, analytical. That coffee bag is Emergenetics. So that's the way I see it, right? So Emergenetics has that. You know that it's conceptual and so on and so forth. But then when you tear it open and you look at what coffee beans blends you have that mix it up, that's what's in it. So that's the way that I would describe the two profiles.
You're seeing more like a subclass of
Analytical.
you're seeing it more like a class and a subclass category lah.
I would disagree on that, but I think it's a fair way of looking at it. I think the bias towards StrengthsFinder is clear, but I'm okay with that bias.
It's yeah. So that's kind of how I see the thing coming together, at least for me, rather than an input output, right? Because it's, I mean, I don't know. For me, input output is kind of like if I put ideation learner together, I come up and I have my Emergenetics profile.
So I would say it's a mix of both, because I don't think it's a pure linear input and then you get an output of analytical lah, because we were just talking about is how people cut the data, right? Because we could interpret it slightly differently, that's why there were certain overlaps. It's just that Emergenetics categorize it into analytical, structural, and conceptual. But we also noted that some part of the conceptual did show up in the influence talent team, right? So I see more as a parallel track lah, but maybe because in StrengthsFinder there are 34 categories, then of course they're like the pizza cut into 34 pieces lah. As compared to a 4-piece pizza, right?
Yeah.
Then these 34 pieces need to be fit into somewhere, right? To best make sense, but they might not even fit because just the labeling it might not, or the definition does not fit within that boundary lah. So that's also the complexity of it lah.
Yeah. And also because the way that it's sliced is different.
Yeah.
So if you look at the domains, right, of strengths, it's actually executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. So it's still 4 broad categories, but sliced differently. So if you kind of want to recategorize them, it might not fit so cleanly as well.
Yeah. It's like the pizza is cut into 34 pieces, but not that cut, right? It could be cut horizontally sideways.
Yeah. It's like recently I ordered a pizza, right? From Domino's. I had 2 pizzas. One was cut in squares and the other one was cut in, the usual slice. So we were like, why is this in squares? Like, how do I tear this? Because we were expecting it to be a slice. So we couldn't quite tear it. I was like, what's wrong with this thing? But it's exactly that, right? It's the way that we slice things. And if we expect it to be sliced differently, then we can't quite make sense of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us, and Ethan for that absolutely amazing summary as you usually do. So next session in 2 weeks' time, we will talk about, I guess we could talk about
Anagram.
Anagram.
Yeah, I think Anagram is probably the next one that we are slightly more familiar with. I think Alex, right? Alex did a deep dive into it.
Yeah, I do like Enneagram. So okay, so next session we will talk about Enneagram. So Val, if you are available, come join us. And with that, we will end today's session.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.